Hi, everyone. How is everyone doing from your side? We are just waiting for a couple of people to come in. But we will start over soon. Thank you for everyone who's joined us. If you are comfortable, please turn on your camera. But if not, we also absolutely understand. So. Okay, let's start, even as some people are joining in right now. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in your side of the world. Welcome to the 8th Urban Social Forum. Another city is possible. I'd like to thank everyone who's here. My name is Vanessa, representing Kota Kita and the Secretariat of the Urban Social Forum. We are so excited to have all of you joining us in this year's Urban Social Forum. I can imagine this is your umpteenth Zoom session in the past year, and I'm very, very glad that you can join us today. As we start, I would like to say a few words to open the discussion as the Secretariat of the Urban Social Forum. I think we can all agree that it has been an unpredictable year, hasn't it, for a lot of us as individual urban citizens and as a collective. The cities that we live in today face what feels like a growing list of uncertainties. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed deep-seated inequality and injustices in our cities, and a lack of inclusivity in policies and infrastructure have compounded the challenges that those with disabilities, women, children, and the urban poor face every day. Meanwhile, food systems and people's access to nutritious food have been impacted, as the global health crisis also triggered disruptions in the supply chain and an economic slowdown. Many of you who have been involved in the USF before, or for new people who is joining USF for the first time, may know, since 2013, the Urban Social Forum has been an open and inclusive space for people who care about and want to advocate for their cities, to exchange knowledge and debate their ideas. We believe in critical conversations about what kind of city we want and need, and how cities can be more inclusive of all kinds of aspirations, communities, people, and futures. The Urban Social Forum continues to be a thriving market of ideas that opens its doors to students, civil society organizations, activists, scholars, community leaders, even government officials, and the private sector. It does so because we need frank and open discussion with a great diversity of people who call cities their home about what we need to make them better places to live, work, and thrive. The slogan, "Another City is Possible," is both an affirmative statement and also an invitation for all of us to reflect, propose, and imagine what we can do to improve our cities. Even though we can't yet meet face to face at this time, it's that spirit of collective action, of critical reflection, which has fueled the Urban Social Forum up until our 8th year and into a more adaptive digital form. As many of us know, in the past year and even until now, communities throughout Indonesia and indeed throughout the world face the impact of the global pandemic. It's like nothing that we've ever seen or experienced before. And yet at the same time, it has exposed and even exacerbated many of the same inequalities and injustices that we already know exist in our cities. Many who were on the poverty line now struggle to have enough to afford food to eat. Many who face barriers to their mobility and unequal access within our societies now find themselves even more isolated and challenged. And people who are living stable lives have been thrown into turmoil due to sickness, loss, and death. The question we would like to propose is this: if another city is possible, then what do we want to do differently to address COVID-19 and also the issues that are at the root of these problems? How can we improve public health in our cities so it can better serve everyone? How can we have a more inclusive approach to children, the elderly, those with disabilities, and poor? How can we ensure that everyone has access to nutritious and healthy food? During this year's forum, we would like to discuss these issues that are going on in Indonesia, but also connect them and connect ourselves to people and perspectives from all around the world. We're very, very glad to welcome guests from different countries today during the opening plenary session to the International Mini Forum. This will be an open discussion about the importance of imagining alternative visions for the city and the activism and advocacy necessary to make these visions a reality. This event will then be followed by 3 thematic discussions on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday on healthy cities, inclusive cities, and food and cities, respectively. Later, from October to December, we will take the conversation back to the city scale, where a second stage of the USF will host city-specific conversations in 2 Indonesian cities, Jakarta and Makassar. To wrap it all up, we will gather, display, and share ideas and insights we have collectively come up with during the closing exhibition at the end of the year. As we kick off the USF festivities tonight, we are so excited to have you, all of you, to come together and invite our friends and colleagues from all around the world to reflect on what is the future of our city is going to be like. And even though remote events have their limitations, we encourage all of you, those joining in Zoom and on YouTube, to contribute your opinions to this discussion. We have prepared a collaborative guestbook on Miro, where you can share your comments, and polling on Mentimeter during the discussion. The links of those tools will be provided in the chat box below. Everyone's ideas and voice counts. With that, I am so excited to officially start the opening plenary discussion and hand over the floor to our moderator, Prodita Sabarini, Executive Editor of The Conversation Indonesia. Thank you very much, everyone, once again, and over to you, Prodita, for the discussion.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's a great opening to the Urban Social Forum, and congratulations, it's now in the 8th event, and it's really great to see this effort to bring so many people together to think about whether we can have a different kind of city, whether another city is possible. So I'm very honored and also excited to be moderating the opening plenary discussion, and we will be listening to amazing people. There's going to be Mas Ahmad Rifai from Kota Kita Foundation, Adriana Allen from Habitat International Coalition, also Rodrigo Iacovini from Polis Institute, and Beka Ulung Hapsara from National Commission on Human Rights. And also we'll have a discussant, Professor Ashok Das from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And we will be exploring different issues, and Vanessa has started to kind of like begin with some kind of issues that we can start to think about. And in this discussion in particular, we'll be exploring the state of urban activism, past learnings from other areas around the world, ideas of participation to answer the forum's question, right? Is another city possible? I'd like to start with a bit of context first, like perhaps asking, like, why do we actually need to ask that question, right? Why do we have to ask, is another city possible? And the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Urban Social Forum, John Taylor, gave me some primary on the reason of being of Urban Social Forum. And not only, as we know, most of the population on Earth live in cities, and we live and we have children, we work, and we build our lives in cities. And the fact is that only a handful of people or groups decide on the type of city that we live in. Governments, private developers, people who have money? And what about others? What about every one of us here, from the working class, women, children, people with disabilities? So that's a start of imagining why we have to kind of like explore that question, or have a vision of what kind of city that we can build together. So there's also a polling, so everybody can share what you think, right, about what does an ideal city look like. You can answer it to link bit.ly/Mentius F1. Please make sure that you join the polling. We want to hear from you. And we can start now by, I'm going to start inviting Mas Ahmad Rifai to share his presentation about the state of the rights to the city agenda in Indonesia. But first, Mas Ahmad Rifai, I'd like to ask you, maybe before going into that, what actually is the rights of the city, right to the city? What does it look like? Can you share that? Mas Rifai, I think could you open your microphone first?
It's always happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, to open the mic. Okay, thank you very much, Prodita. So basically, if you ask me to answer what is right to the city, it's pretty kind of tricky question, because at some point, the definition and the perspective of right to the city is pretty kind of dynamic. But I can maybe represent a little bit of like my understanding and my learning from my colleagues from global platform right to the city definition. About right to the city is a right of all inhabitants, present and future, to use, occupy, produce, govern, enjoy just, inclusive and safe sustainable city, villages and settlement divine as a common good. So basically that's quite an introduction of what my understanding about right to the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I grew up in a city, not as big as Jakarta, but big enough, right? I grew up in Bogor, and I never really thought, as I grew up, kind of think about, the type of city that I want to live in. So that kind of concept that we have the right to the city and have the right to shape how we envision a city that we want to live in is something valuable, something really valuable. Okay, so we can. I think a lot of people have already filled in the polling, so maybe we can share. We can share. We can see the polling here. Maybe can anyone? Yes. Okay. Breathable. Oh, yes. Breathable trees, clear air. That's so. That really says something about the city that we would like, right? Like having clear air is really important, and it's something that is very, I mean, we don't have that in Jakarta especially, and maybe in other cities as well. So I'm just going to read some of the answers here. People as a community getting access to fulfill their needs, capital, all caps, for the needs and be able to articulate their interests to get what they desire. Inclusive, great access to public transport, sustainable, easy to go anywhere with public transport, green and clean, more greens, friendly pedestrian. So Mas Rifai, I'd like to ask Mas Rifai, looking at these wish or vision of the people here in the forum, how can we get that? How can we manifest that wish into reality? And maybe you can share that with, you know, the state of the rights to the city agenda in Indonesia. Don't forget your mic.
Again, sorry. Should I share my presentation now?
Yes, please.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Urban Social Forum for this wonderful opportunity. Sitting here in a panel with a very respectful people working in the transformation of our city, Ms. Adriana, with Rodrigo as well, with Mas Beka here. It's a very honored opportunity for me. It's a very great opportunity for me. This is really great moment to present also my perspective about right to the city in Indonesian context, while it is not yet very popular in the realm of our citizenship practice in Indonesia. But it's been there, conceptually in our debate among activists and scholars for many years back after the reforms. I think people talk about the right to the city or Hak Atas Kota in Indonesia. I want to present this picture first. So to start with, I want to show this picture because this picture is quite give some meaning for me. So it goes back to Solo in 1998, celebrating the falls of Suharto regimes. Just to give you an introduction of the situation before reformations, this picture give us a kind of introduction to how we remember life in our urban setting in the past was strictly controlled by the states. You know, our experience of citizenship was far from being participatory and democratic in transforming our city. The designs of our city, our urban planning, our process of budgeting were pretty much centralized and the national and controlled by the national government. Even I remember the color of our city even determined by the regime. We remember exactly how the color of every gate in the city had to be yellow. And the protest for me was it's a kind of political manifestation of right to the city for me. And I was there as well at the moment of this celebration of the fall of Suharto. It's in front of my university in 11 Maret University. It is to say that our right to enjoy and participate in the city was limited at that time, and it was influenced by a strict political context. For many years, to say, if we want to say right or claim our right, was a taboo in our daily practice of citizenships. Until now, I can still say that our government even, correct me if I'm wrong, our government still often feel reluctant and feel uncomfortable when talking about right or hak. In Bahasa, we call it hak. Even if I translate the right to the city as Hak Atas Kota in Indonesian language, I don't know whether this is a correct translation or not. But but I know exactly when we say right to the city, and to say Hak Atas Kota, I reckon that we say right to the city is entail a spirit of movement to change our life in the space of our city, like a cry in demand, say, to contest and to oppose our current urban reality. Urban citizens use space, live in the city, interact, influence, debate, confront their aspiration about life in the city. And I believe what's happening now in our city is a manifestation of struggle to shape our city, which is then I call as a manifestation of right to the city. As also David Harvey said, that right to the city is far more than the individual liberty to access urban resources. It is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. It is moreover a common rather than individual right, since this transformation inevitably depends upon the exercise of collective power to reshape the processes of urbanization. The freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. So I think this pretty much kind of want to kind of underline that right to city is a collective and a diffuse right, and it's views city as a commons. What I would like to present then is that looking at the international movement of right to the city, I pick up this kind of slide from one of the presentation of a global platform, right to the city, that the history of how right to the city being presented in the global context. It started from the era of 2000s with the Millennium Development responded by the first World Social Forum, and then 2013 there were international workshop moving toward implementation of right to the city in Latin America and the international level. I'm happy here to have Rodrigo as well, to kind of maybe tell the story how right to the city movement in Latin America can be kind of a reflection for the Indonesian movement here in the urban context. I think Rodrigo and Kota Kita also in one member of the global platform Right to the City. So we pretty much kind of engage in many campaigns of Right to the City in Asia and the global level. So until 2016, the movement in the Habitat 3, we promote the implementation of Right to the City in the new urban agenda. So if we want to go back to the definition, so Mbak Prodita asked me to explain some of the definition. I pick up definition from World Charter of the Right to the City, It's equitable use of city within the principle of sustainability, democracy, equity, and social justice. Thinking of another city as possible, I think we are looking at some of the prospect of the city in the future of sustainable, more democratic, equity, and also social justice we can find in the city. GPR2C, Global Platform Right to the City, also explain on the definition of right to the city as a right of all inhabitants, present and the future, permanent and temporary. Doesn't matter you live in a permanent situation in your city or temporary. Maybe you are living in the temporary kind of housing, to use, occupy, produce, govern, enjoy just, inclusive, safe, and sustainable city, villages, and settlement divine as a common good. I think it's quite comprehensive definition because it's covered many elements of good city. I think what I would like to share, I cannot speak on behalf of the Indonesian experience because it's something still contesting right now. I mean, like there's a lot of exercise of this kind of practice of right to the city in Indonesia, but I want to see from the point of view of Kota Kita and our practice in relation to right to the city. I think what Kota Kita really underlined from the elements of right to the city is the aspect of participation. I think many scholars and many kind of people talk the importance of this participation in shaping right to the city and contribute to kind of different kind of aspect of say for example inclusive economy, inclusive citizenship, sustainable and resilient city, social functioning city, justice and diversity. I think what I would like to say, so the core kind of work of my institution, for example, Kota Kita movement so far in the context of right to the city has been laid out on the principle of participatory and democratic city. What we offer, so for example, democratic governance of the city, we believe that citizens should be at the heart of the decision-making process that determine the environment and the quality of living of the center they reside in. And they are entitled to governance that is inclusive, transparent, and socially just. In the context of our practice and our approach, for example, Kota Kita pretty much kind of focus on how to push more access to information for just urban development. In fact, information is the front door of bolstering citizen agency toward meaningful participation and transformation of our city. In many cases, imbalanced access to information often correlate to domination of a knowledge and power relation, which perpetuate elite capture. So that's Kota Kita more doing a lot of kind of project in relation to how to promote participatory data collection and then provide back information to the community to be able to kind of, inform the process of urban development. We also work a lot on promoting participatory budgeting because we believe that we pay taxes and it's important to make sure that the public budget is distributed in transparent and equitable manner. I believe this kind of regulation in Indonesia that mandate of development planning and budgeting and according to participatory principle and citizen participation in our cities. Access to public space also really important and essential, and Kota Kita pretty much kind of put a lot of attention to it. Physical space and its social functioning to facilitate meaningful interaction and the citizen due to the massive utilization of space for commercial purposes. Access to space in urban setting often scarce. So there are many work of Kota Kita in different cities, like in Banjarmasin and Solo, related to how to open more accessible public space for urban citizens. And we also promote inclusive citizenship. So Kota Kita offer and doing training, and also we call it, we have an academy called Urban Citizenship Academy, and we've been gonna kind of establish a strong commitment to build a strong civil society and contribute to more inclusive urban development. I think to end my presentation, that's all, and I would like to offer this discussion because in Indonesia, particularly the debate around the practice of right to the city in Indonesia is quite new. I mean, like, especially there is no such word right to the city or Hak Atas Kota in the current documents of regulation or law in Indonesia, but it's been practicing and such kind of, in the real kind of implementation, there are some practices of this exercise of right to the city. So I want to end my presentation, and I think I'm more kind of keen to learn more from other kind of speakers about the perspective and the exercise of right to the city, especially in Latin America, or from Adriana in the global context, how right to the city being introduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fai. Thank you for the presentation, and it really piques my interest. I have so many questions that I want to ask, but I might hold that. We'll listen to all the speakers first, the panelists first, and the next speaker is Adriana Allen from Habitat International Coalition, and I'd like to ask Adriana to kind of share what has worked and what has not worked in the effort to advance the right to the city agenda globally. But perhaps I think maybe I can insert the question that I have that came up after listening to Mas Rifai. Mas Rifai mentioned about inclusive, transparent, socially just city, and there's different manifestations or kind of like strategies to help that, right? Access to information, participatory budgeting, access to public space, inclusive citizenship. But could you kind of maybe share with us what does it look like? What does an inclusive city or transparent or socially just city looks like in real life? And also share about what has worked and not worked in the effort to reach that. Okay, so that's over to you, Adriana.
Thank you so much, Prodita. 1 million question. Thanks a lot, first of all, to the Urban Social Forum and to Kota Kita for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to join you today. What has worked and hasn't worked, and I'm definitely going to include also in the discussion your question, Prodita. I don't know if we could have the slides, just to propose a few points that I would like to put on the table for discussion and provocation more than anything else. So in terms of, rather than talking about what has worked and what hasn't worked, what I would like to do is to highlight what I see as 3 key achievements of the right to the city as a social mobilization process. And of course, with every achievement come many challenges. So what I want to do at the same time, as I put forward, again, not all, but 3, what I see as 3 key achievements of this line of mobilizing for change, of pursuing a different and another city and making it possible. I will also be talking about what challenges do we need to watch and look at. So again, I don't know if you have the slides. It's only just to be together in the 3 main points I would like to discuss, or do you want me to share them? Whatever you prefer.
I can share them right now.
Yeah, sure, super, thank you. So perhaps one important thing, looking at the responses on Mentimeter and also at what Rifai was saying, I think that it's important to remind ourselves that the notion of the right to the city has gone a long way, since Lefebvre came up with it. So we know that initially what he did was really to pick up the struggle on the contradictions of capitalism in the urban scene, in the urban sphere. So he did something really important in the 60s by doing that. But when we talk about the rise to the city today, we are witnessing much more than that. We are witnessing, we can go to the next one. Yeah. To the next slide, if you wish. Yeah. Next one. Yes, thank you. Sorry, no, the first one, the second one in what you have. Yeah. So, okay, we go back. You have an overview of what are going to be my 3 main points. Do you think that we can go to the second slide? Second, from the beginning? Thank you, that's it. So I think that the first amazing and key achievement of the right to the city has been to develop a collective project in and through the urban. And this collective project clearly has created not only a new language, new imaginations, and a whole set of tactics and tools and very specific ways of building a different city. So this idea of building social force is extraordinarily important. We have a new imaginary and we have precedents to build that social force. And that is happening in a very transversal way. And when I talk about transversality, I mean both in terms of articulating fights across different social movements, different sectors of civil society, governments, and so on, but also across many different things. So today, when we talk about the right to the city, we are clearly not just talking about the struggle against the commodification and the financialization of housing and land, but of that, together with the fight for food justice, food sovereignty, climate justice, water and sanitation justice, and the list goes on and on. So in in doing that very important, this very important achievement, I think that there are four key notions that we need to watch and protect, if you wish, because they are very much responsible for the advance that has, that has been made so far in activating the right to the city. The first one is something that was very clear in the first work, and was the primacy that the right to the city gives to the idea of use as opposed to exchange value. So here the whole idea that the right to the city and another city that might be possible that we want to imagine and not see and also make possible has to do precisely with the protection of the use of the city, the appropriation of the city. And this idea came very much from many of the comments you made. So clearly here, one of the crucial challenges is very much to remain alert about the fact that very often there is a conflation. Sometimes we might find that the right to the city language or concept is used, but only to talk about individual rights and even individual rights to property. So this is clearly not what the right to the city is about. The right to the city is about collective rights that, if you wish, do three things. First, of course, is the right of appropriation of as access, occupation, and use of urban space. Second, an idea that also many of you highlighted, the right to be recognized and treated as equal, regardless of our difference or social identities. And third, the right to participation in any decision that contributes to the production of urban space, what Nancy Fraser used to call is a fight for parity of political participation, not for participation as a one of exercise. So very important, this idea of use, the use value of the city, the commoning function of the city. The second one, I think, has to do with expanding the understanding and the landscape of what we see as the everyday. So the right to the city is not something that comes from above, but is something that is being produced, crafted, and claimed, both through processes of claiming rights, resisting forced evictions and so on, but also building the right to the city. And the image that I include here, for instance, is one that is an image I took working in Lima, in the high hills of peripheral Lima, where this is the way in which people are producing city on the everyday and finding ways of producing land, producing housing, producing access to water and so on, but also producing citizenship in that process. So one very important thing is that very often in the past, this idea of working or supporting the claim of rights, of human rights, and the actual building of those rights has been seen as a separate thing. And I think that the right to the city has helped us to see that they are completely interconnected. And this is something crucial in the work we do within Habitat International Coalition. The third important aspect is the fact that the right to the city has opened a territorial base in the fight for the democracy. And this cannot be underestimated. This means that this fight is deeply spatial. It is to account. So we're talking here about a way in which we are not just talking anymore about abstract human rights that, that pertain only to individuals, but rights that have a word. So the word matters enormously. And I'm going to come back to this idea of what this territorial base has done in terms of claiming and working for the right to the city in and through the urban. If we go to the next slide. Could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Again, among the many achievements that can be claimed, I think that a key one has been that of fueling a whole wave of progressive municipalism. And this has nothing to do with a handful of enlightened mayors here and there that, that are changing things. What we are seeing here is a growing wave in which the whole governance of cities, the whole conception of what cities can be and what role cities play in crafting, in protecting human rights related to habitat really has gained momentum. And this is very important because in many contexts we see this progressive municipalism making progress, even in the most adverse context, in contexts where the context of Trump, Bolsonaro's, and the many other shapes at sometimes very regressive and reactionary national governments take. So what we see that cities are offering the protection that very often is denied by national states. And this is extraordinarily important. Secondly, I think that also what we can learn from this wave of progressive municipalism is that this is nothing to do with multi-stakeholderism, with bringing, multi-stakeholders, stakeholders with different interests on the questions that we treat, whether it's mobility, water, sanitation, housing, and so on, in a discrete function. This is very much about the building of key alliances between organized civil society, social movements, and very often populating local and regional authorities in terms of the agenda, direction, and so on. So I just thought that it's important to, when we look at this process, which is extraordinary, to remind ourselves that, again, the right to the city is about ordinary, it's not about local governments becoming something else, it's about primarily about ordinary people becoming political subjects instead of being treated as objects of politics. And this is a very important distinction. As Fraser reminds us, it's not just about pursuing social protection, which typically has been the left project, or freedom, which typically encompasses the right project, but it is very much about achieving emancipation. And so these terms are very important to distinguish, because again, very often we will find that we go back in defined simply for individual freedom or individual protection, as it has happened in many cases in the context of COVID. This, of course, takes us to think about many things. And one is, again, this idea that it's not enough to fight or work for the right to the city in the city, but through the city. And this is to emphasize the importance of the multi-scalar nature of the work ahead. So, for instance, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals and many other documents on this long trajectory from the year 2000, or we could even pick this battle before, we will see that progress has been made in injecting a different language, but sometimes this is co-opted. Sometimes there is still resistance to be more assertive on this, not only new language, but very much different terms of reference for what make another city and what make it possible. For instance, if you look at the SDGs, you will find that the language of justice is very light. Yeah, we will talk about inclusivity, diversity, and so on, but there are certain notions which are very seen or felt still as very radical, and we need to do that. Similarly, if we look at the United Nations architecture for the protection of human rights, we will still see a high degree of compartmentalization. So, again, seeking transversality across human rights related to habitat is essential. And the right to the city gives us the tools and the vocabulary to do so. If we move to the next one, please, and I just to conclude. I think that undeniably another key achievement of the right to the city has been really putting forward these notions, more than a notion of diversity, inclusion, the idea of a gender city. And this is very important because if we look at the earlier work of Lefebvre and much that follow in trying to articulate what the right to the city means, we find that actually it was quite gender blind. So what we see today is that the feminist movement has injected a completely different perspective, not yesterday, but over a long period, into the understanding of the right to the city. The right to the city is, of course, the right of women to the city, the rights of girls to the city, but it's also very important to notice here that it's not just about women and girls, men and boys. So gender is a very important dimension, but women are never just women. And this is something that the feminist movement reminds us very strongly. We are pushed here to look at different forms of identity, social identity that combine, and they have to do with race, with religion, with our sexual orientation, with our class, with our age, with our physical and mental ability, with our tenure, security, and the list goes on and on. So this is extraordinarily important. I'm going to conclude now. What I would say here is the challenge is to really push forward, not to stay with the language of diversity and inclusion, because very often that language of inclusion and diversity takes simply a sort of liberal pluralism. We are all in the city, there should be space for everyone and so on, but doesn't do much about the treatment of differences that keep on working and reproducing process of marginalization, exclusion, and segregation. So this is crucial to really remain alert of that. So to conclude, because I'm running out of time, I would just say that we really need to keep to the fore questions of justice, difference, and equality. Very, very difficult questions that very often are sided away in conversations about the right to the city and how to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, for that explanation about the right to the city and what we have achieved so far. I'd like to invite Rodrigo Iacovini to share his presentation, and I think we can learn a lot from the city movement in Brazil and South America, and I'm very curious to listen to the experience there. So Rodrigo, please.
Thank you, Perdita. And you pronounced precisely right, Iacovini. You did well. So she was really worried with my last name. And it's a tricky one, even for Brazilians. So that was amazing. And thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for the Kotakita friends, Vanisha, Husna, Ahmad. I'm very happy with this invitation to share a little bit of what Latin America and what Brazil can say about the right to the city experience here. And I'm not going to give you a full presentation with the history. I thought that it was more useful to bring two main points that could add to the conversation. And I'm not having a formal PowerPoint presentation because I cannot do that very beautiful ones, such as Adriana and Ahmad. But at the end, to compensate the lack of presentation, I'm going to show a very short video, 2 minutes, of the global platform that it's going to be beautiful and you're going to like it. Today, September 7th, it's an important date for Brazilians because it's the day, it's a holiday here in Brazil, a bank holiday, a holiday from the state, because September 7th, it's when we celebrate the independence of Brazil from Portugal in the 19th century. Don't worry, I'm not going to take too many history lessons, but it's a symbolic day for us, for Brazilians, because it's the time when every year we remember that we were colonized by Portugal, and we have problems that goes way back, that we are dealing with them today, but goes way back then. And the independence process, it was not an easy one and a beautiful one, but it was guided by our elites. It was not a democratic and popular movement. It was led by the son of the Portugal's emperor, which means the prince. The Prince of Portugal led the independence process here in Brazil. So you can see how the elites were behind it. And we also paid for the independence £2 million at the time for Portugal. Of course, Brazil didn't have £2 million. So we had to borrow from England to pay Portugal £2 million. But Portugal itself was in debt with England, more than £2 million, which means we got the debt in Brazil, Portugal didn't got the money, and England got £2 million debt from Brazil to have the independence. So 200 years ago, precisely in 1822, which means 199 years ago, almost 200 years now, we had a huge debt and no democracy at the end of our independence process. And this is still somehow two main aspects of why we can't move forward with democratizing our societies and our cities. Of course, we came a long way during these two past centuries. We conquered a lot. We are now a republic, and we have now a democratic regime. But this is a very thin line of the democratic regime that we are living now. Because today, September 7th of 2021, today, there is a lot of demonstrations scheduled throughout Brazil from the right-wing extremist led by our president, Jair Bolsonaro, that are going to claim for a coup d'etat, for a coup, a political coup. Yeah, that's it. Our president is fostering a movement that is claiming for a coup to close our Congress, to close our Supreme Court, because it wants to be an emperor. So 200 years later, we are back at the same point that we were, not the same point, but we are back claiming what we had 200 years ago. And this is something, it's so hard to listen to this and to think about that, because we have been fighting our whole lives, and my whole life and many other people's whole life, too many years now, to have a democratic country and to have a democratic city. And it's important to say that the right to the city is deeply connected with the fight for democracy. And that's very important. And I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. No worries, I'm going to get there. But I would just like to state that at this point, it's very connected. When states, they are claiming under the new urban agenda that, yeah, we agree with participation, we agree with opening spaces for people to tell us what they think it should be public policies and urban policies. That's very beautiful, but we want to govern. We don't want to actually just be listened of, or just to a kind of participation that we know it's not very meaningful. We want to govern, and the right to the city has in itself, as Ahmad brought us, the word govern. And we believe that a radical democracy is the foundation of the right to the city. So when I hear that our president in Brazil is supporting and pushing for a movement to end democracy in Brazil, I see a big threat to the right to the city, because it's not only that's going to shut the Congress, it's not only the Supreme Court that is under threat. Our local governments are under threat. Our civil societies and social movements are under threat as well. So how can you say that you are going to move forward in a city that everyone comes together to decide and to build the cities in their daily lives, and of course in the institutional spaces, if you have no democracy? So this is very important, and this is one of the key messages that I wanted to bring to you, because the right to the city movement arose in Latin America together with the movement for democracy, because we were living at the 70s and the 80s military dictatorships in many different countries, not only in Brazil. We had that in Brazil, but we had it also in Argentina. Adriana can say about that. We had that in Uruguay, in Paraguay, and in other countries as well. and we have to, I'm going to make a comment here, military dictatorships sponsored by the US government. End of my commentary here. And this is a geopolitical movement. But that was the time when we were fighting for democracy, fighting against dictatorship, but at the same time, we are fighting for new societies. So it was a different way to frame our societies and a different way to frame our cities. So the right to the city movement grew up in Brazil, in Latin America, within this movement of fighting for democracy. So it's deeply connected, and it learned a lot from the democracy fight. It learned a lot that you can always, you only can achieve social change when you are fostering a wider movement, when you are connecting different struggles and different points of view. So that's the beauty of the right to the city, because it connects different perspectives, it connects different claims, it connects different aspects of the same social experience that is the city, the same common good that is the city. So that's why it's so beautiful, the idea of the right to the city. I think it's beautiful, at least. I hope you do too. But I think it's beautiful because it really gives us a complex platform to move forward. Not a simplistic answer to, if you have to change the traffic, you just have to lower the velocity and to have more buses and collective. Yeah, that's part of the problem itself. But if you want to have a different city, it's a much more wider and complex answer. And the right to the city gives you this complexity. So 50 years later of the rise of the claim for the right to the city, and when we began here in Brazil fighting for the right to the city, we are different and we are stronger. And what we learned that I wanted to share also is that why we are stronger today than we were then, or than we were 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. And that's a message that I wanted also to put into discussion. We advanced a lot on the right to the city movement because we realized that the right to the city, it's a constantly evolving concept. Although Ahmed brought to you a concept of the right to the city, which is which is the global platform concept of the right to the city, this has evolved. If you see the first meaning that was somehow in the Charter of ECO 92 in Rio de Janeiro, and then in the World Social Forum in 2001, and then the World Charter of the Right to the City, the concept has been evolving. It's not the same, because cities are not the same, societies are not the same, our claims are not the same. So this is one of the key messages that we have to have clear, is that the right to the city encompasses always new claims, and it's always incorporating new claims, and it's always something new in the horizon. And that doesn't mean that we cannot have it institutionalized, because there is some people that say, so the right to the city is an utopia, it's something that leads us, but it cannot be put into legislation. I don't agree with that. We can put into the legislation, we can use that as a north, a guidance for our public policies, but we have to be careful not to freeze the concept. The concept cannot be frozen. not to freeze, sorry. The concept cannot be frozen, cannot be static, it evolves. For instance, it evolved in the material dimension. 30 years ago, we were not supposed to be claiming internet as an urban infrastructure, a basic urban infrastructure. We were not going to claim that 30 years ago. Today, at the face of the pandemic, that everyone had to be within home, it was a big wake-up call, how we have to have internet as a basic human right and need. Because here in Brazil, the damage of the pandemic were very much worse to the people who doesn't have a good internet connection. So it is a basic need. In the symbolic dimension, we also evolved. Today, we are contesting the monuments that we have in our cities that portray slave traders, that portray genocide dictators. So we are claiming that they have to be taken out of the street, or at least that they should have a critical context that addresses it in the way it is. Just to give you a glimpse of what we are saying that in São Paulo, just São Paulo, the city of São Paulo, we have more than 367 monuments. More than 367. Within this, 200 portrays human people. Within these 200, only one portrays a Black woman in Brazil. 0.5% of the monuments in São Paulo portray a Black women, which are the major group of people here in São Paulo. So 169 portray men. So you see the difference, it's huge, and the inequality is huge. And we are fighting for the symbolic dimension of the right to the city today. And we were not fighting on that 10, 20 years ago. So we are constantly evolving. And we know now that the right to the city should have a focus on the body dimension as well. And what I'm saying about that body, why the body? Because each body is different from each one. And the notion that we have to have an embodied perspective of the right to the city. I don't know if I'm translating correctly, because this is a notion from the Portuguese in Brazil, and I don't know if it's the precise one in English. But the embodied perspective of the right to the city claims that the right to the city can only be a valid fight if it is a feminist claim, if it is an anti-racist claim, because women and Black people suffer the city from their bodies in very different perspective, with very different social markers that say they can or they cannot be at some spaces, they have to bear or they won't have to bear sexual harassment in public spaces, and so on. So the body matters to the right to the city. And this is something that we have learned from the past 2 decades that made us stronger. And why it made us stronger? Because today I'm not standing alone as an LGBTQI activist in the city. As a gay person, I'm not standing alone today, because I grew up in a very small town in the countryside of Brazil that didn't have any LGBTQI site, any LGBTQI open person out of the closet, and I didn't have reference. But then when I moved to Fortaleza, that I was confronted with Fortaleza's Pride Parade, that I saw a mass movement claiming for visibility, the city taught me that I was not alone. The city showed me that I was not alone. that had other LGBTQI people also claiming for visibility, also wanting to have a full and decent experience in city. But it also showed me that only with hand in hand with women, Black people, and indigenous people, we can also make a different city and make a city that Adriana pointed out precisely. It's not only a diverse city, it's a city that embrace difference and build on from difference. So this is something that I was willing to bring to you.
Yes, that's really beautiful, and I think I'm very sorry to listen to what is happening in Brazil at the moment. But what you say before, that the right to the city is really connected to democracy. So from what I hear from you of that, I have optimism that there is this, as Adriana say, a social force to retain that power among the people and among citizens. But I'm very what's the word in English? We're limited with time here, so I'm wondering if we can see the video that you would like to show us.
Hi, Prodita and Rodrigo. I think due to the time, the limited time, I would propose us moving to
No
the chat
worries.
for the next one. And then if we have time at the end, we will show the video, and we'll also circulate it on our social media for people to see. Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Over to you. Back to you, Prodita.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. So now I'm going to invite Berperan, right, from the National Commission of Human Rights.
Pak BK.
Pak BK.
It's okay, Prodita. Since this is the first time we met, but you can call me BK.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. First of all, I would like to thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share our experience from the National Human Rights Institution of the Republic of Indonesia about what we have been doing for the last about 6 or 7 years about the cities and the human rights. That maybe it's in line with what Rifai, Adriana, and Rodrigo are doing so far about rights to the city, because actually the essence or the substance is very similar between human rights cities and the rights to the city movement in Indonesia, because maybe the context as well is very similar. And then the second one is I would like to share my congratulations as well to this event, that's wonderful event that connecting all initiatives that widespread in around the world, and then we can join together to put the city as a center of the changes in social or the human rights movement in around the world. I will try to present less than 10 minutes so we can discuss more about this initiative. But my presentation would like to share our ideas as a human rights cities, as a space for changes in Indonesia. Maybe we can move to the next slide, please. The second slide. So this is the Indonesian context. Maybe some of them is already shared by Rifai about the situation in some region in Indonesia, but still in the previous one. Yeah, I think the first one is the context is a rapid urbanization. The projection in Indonesia maybe in 2040, more or less 70% of the citizen in Indonesia will live in the city. So we can imagine the 70%, which means maybe around 200 million people will live in the city in 2040. So there will become huge challenges to overcome the problem that within the rapid urbanization in Indonesia. The second one is local governance that is not based on human rights is the one of the main causes why there's still a lot of challenges, especially if we are talking about human rights fulfillment in Indonesia. And also weak protection for the vulnerable groups and minorities, such as the recognition of the rights of indigenous people, freedom of religions and belief, disability, and so on and so forth. And also the integrated character of cities in Indonesia that requires big city to become a catalyst for the development of their hinterland. So I think this is the problem. That's why Jakarta is surrounding by Bekasi, Bogor, and other cities that also creating unequal relation between Jakarta as a center or a central of development with the city surrounding of Jakarta. And also we are facing a declining quality of public services like transportation, clean water, electricity, and so on and so forth. For instance, if we come to Jakarta, we can see how the infrastructure, the electricity, and then the other infrastructure is also already well prepared and also consuming very high energy. But if we go to the eastern part of Indonesia, we can see that there's a lot of problem over there from the infrastructure, or also for the public services. That's why this become a big question in Indonesia context. And then for the our institution, local government is the third most frequently reported parties to our institutions. So the first one is the police, the second one is the private sector, and the third one is the local government. So there's all the Indonesian context and challenges that we are facing right now. Move to the next slide, please. To the next slide. So this is some of the summary of the history of the human rights movement in Indonesia cities. So like Rifai mentioned before, actually the regional autonomy in Indonesia starting after the fall of Suharto's regime in 1998. So after the centralized government, as an antithesa of those kind of centralized government, we try to implement the regional autonomy in 1999. So that's the first stepping stone to entering how to delivering the public services closer to the people. And the second one is also the mainstreaming movement of the human rights cities in 2014 until now. So because we already set up some standard of the human rights cities in Indonesia, and then also we try to invite more parties to be involved, not only by national human rights institution, but also we are involving another parties to join in, like from the NGO side, from INFIT, International NGO Forum on Indonesian Development, and also from the executive side, from the executive office to the president, or KSP, Kantor Staff President. So we try to build more collaborative works on the human rights cities issue. So we try, so in order to gaining more participants from the region, also from the local government side, or from the civil society. So that's our strategy. And the third one, we also have like a counterpart from the government that organized by the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. They already have a program that they call as human rights friendly cities. Human rights friendly cities as a mechanism or awarding to specific cities that fulfillment some of the requirement, like public services and the policies, and also the innovation from respective local government to as a part of fulfillment, respecting, and also another effort of human rights in Indonesia. That's some of the history of human rights movement in Indonesian cities. So move to the next slide, please. So this is also some initiative that we already done so far. For instance, we also participating in the World Human Rights Cities Forum as a forum to share our innovation, our experience in the context of the fulfillment of human rights in the local areas, in the local level, and also participating in Geneva for the side event. Also try to propose our principle, our experience on the human rights in the local context to the UN, and other effort like Human Rights Festival that annually organized since 2015, and then every year the host will take turns from various local government. So we try to collaborate the effort with different local governments, so they have experience to organizing the international event, as well as they can share their experience in the local context to all participants from around the world. The next one is, please. Yes, this is our dynamic definition about the human rights city. So I think it's also localizing with Indonesian context, and also based on the human rights standard and norm and in international level and international instrument. So like human rights management in the local context, when local government, city or provincial legislative council, civil society, private sector, national human rights institution, ombudsman, and related stakeholders cooperate to improve quality of life for the citizen in the spirit of partnership based on human rights standard and norms. This is a very dynamic definition, because maybe we will have changes in our central policy toward human rights issues, or towards to the governance in the context of democratization and the human rights fulfillment in Indonesia. The next slide, please. So this is human rights principles that we are proposing to be adopted in Indonesia. So there's 10 principles that we absorb from the law of in Indonesia, the experience in the local governments, and also some of the principles in human rights. So we conclude with 10 principles in human rights. You can read it by yourself. Like rights to the city is become the first principles. So I think it's like an acknowledgement to the movement of the rights to the city to become a basic principle when we are talking about human rights cities in Indonesia. So I think that's why the initiative from Kota Kita and other cities that are proposing the rights to the city movement will in line with our initiative and our movement. So to the next slide, please. So this is the some of the lesson that we can learn from some region in Indonesia. For instance, in Palu, Central Sulawesi, they already issued the major regulation that have a local human rights action plan that involves restoration of the victims' rights of 75 tragedy is a gross violation of human rights. This has become a very sensitive issue since the 75 tragedy is also related with communism in Indonesia and also some of the political movement in Indonesia. In Wonosobo also we already have a local regulation that regulate several rights, and then also they establish like a local commission of human rights that consisting 6 members that comes from the multi stakeholders in the respective area and also from Bojonegoro. And the last thing that I would like to present is about challenges about the human rights cities movement in Indonesia. The first thing is sustainability. I think because the turnover of the major region in the respective area, the big question of sustainability in Indonesia in human rights cities will always come up because they already they only have 2 periods to lead the respective region to regulate the government in the local context. And the internalization, because this is some of big issues in Indonesia, the internalization of a human rights principle to become a daily guidance for the state apparatus to act based on human rights principle. And then also cooperation with law enforcement apparatus, because sometimes human rights issue is not connected with the law enforcement apparatus like a police or the military. So this is becomes a big issues and challenges to overcome the initiative in the human rights cities in the local context in Indonesia. I think that's it, my presentation. So I think we can discuss more about this initiative in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Beka. I think that was a wonderful presentation, and it really shows that human rights principles can help as a framework in looking into envisioning what an ideal city looks like, and then translating it into, as you mentioned, the local context and the local government and the local stakeholders trying to define that principles into everyday reality in the city. So that was really great. Thank you, Pak Beka. And I'd like to invite Professor Ashok as a discussant here from University of Hawaii at Manoa. I'd like to invite your thoughts after listening to the 4 panelists sharing about their perspectives on rights to the city. Please, Pak Ashok.
Thank you very much, Pradita. I would also first like to thank USF, the Secretariat, and Vanessa, as well as Kota Kita for inviting me. And I must say that it was very illuminating, this preceding discussion. And so I thank the speakers, all of them, from Rifai to Adriana to Rodrigo and Babeka, everyone, for showing us these various dimensions of what is both, the potential as well as the challenge before us in terms of instituting and sort of expanding the concept of the right to the city across cities in the world. So I have some thoughts. I thought I might and maybe some questions also, especially for our speakers. And so there were, let me pick up on some of the words that were mentioned or some of the key terms, I mean, from all the presentations, but a couple of them initially from, I think, Adriana's presentation. So one was the concept of difference, right? That the right to the city is about recognizing difference. Then there was another one which was about just a second, I had it here. It's not just multi-stakeholderism, but including, but going beyond and trying to establish a concept which is also variable and probably needs to change with time. So now Rodrigo mentioned something very interesting, and that was about how, I mean, the right to the city movement in Latin America started in the 70s and the 80s, also as a struggle against, I mean, oppressive regimes and authoritarian dictatorial regimes towards creating more democracy, both at national as well as local levels. Now, given the way things have changed in the last 5 to 10, I would say not even 10 years, less than 10 years, the kinds of political shifts that we have seen globally, I'm left to wonder now as to whether the right to the city movement is probably facing some challenges, because the opponents of that probably have picked up on the same kind of sort of strategies and tactics that the right to the city movement had sort of refined and strengthened over time. So what I mean is, looking at how things have changed, say in Brazil, and but not just there, but in the US, how things are changing in terms of how some of the gains that have been made in terms of human rights, in terms of broadly speaking, rights to the city, etc., are being overturned. For example, things that have happened in Texas most recently, if you've been following the news about a big blow to women's rights and reproductive rights. Similarly, in California, what's going on, which is considered one of the bastions of sort of progressive democracy and progressive moves in terms of establishing the right to the city in the US. Similarly, things that have been going on in South Asia and other parts of Southeast Asia, in Poland, in Hungary. So what I'm saying is that because of social media? Somebody also mentioned social media. I think it was in the chats that I was following also, both because of digital and social media, as well as I think a turn towards more sort of nativism, more nationalism, more jingoism in general across the world in politics. Democracy itself is probably posing some challenges now for the right to the city movement, right? So I would like to hear some of the reactions to that from our speakers, particularly from Brazil. And for our speakers from Indonesia, I had this other question that there's indeed been a remarkable, transformation since the beginning of Reformasi, from the time that the Suharto regime fell close to over 20 years ago now. And a lot of gains have been made. And as Pabeka was showing us, there are even more things on the anvil, and we are seeing a lot of regulatory changes, etc., which are becoming much more inclusive and much more sensitive to these issues. At the same time, there are some real challenges at the ground level, right? So if you look at the ground level, Kota Kita has been engaged in trying to promote participatory democracy, and I think it's an excellent example of how, something could emerge from nothing and make such an influence in a very short period of time across the country, but also beyond the national borders. Yet, I'm saying that in most cities in Indonesia, it seems, and I'm a little bit familiar with it because I do research on urban issues in Indonesia. So if you look at the landscape of civil society organizations and non-government organizations, the kinds of CSOs that could actually change the conversation in terms of right to the city, I think those kinds of CSOs at the grassroots, which could work on simple things like providing access to services, access to shelter, and those, I mean, there are very few of those, right? Even if they are there, there isn't much effort to include them in the sort of routine sort of policy making, governance, and planning sort of decisions and processes that happen in Indonesian cities, right? So I would like to hear from the Indonesian speakers as to what do they think is a challenge there? And let me just throw some ideas there. One thing I think is that somehow these concepts need to be introduced much sooner in terms of like the curricula in schools and universities, so that for various reasons, I mean, when an adult person is introduced to this idea, I mean, there are many limitations as to, I mean, how much that person might change, not just because people's opinions and views are quite sort of solidified by then, but also because of real limitations of time and access and things like that. So I am a big proponent and believer that education has a big role to play in this, right? That's one. And the second thing is that because of what I also mentioned earlier, that, because of social media and because of this changing sort of political sort of mood across the world that you see, maybe the citizens themselves need to be sort of made aware of what the concept of right to the city is. And maybe there is a bigger challenge that previously the enemy or the opponent seemed to be the state, for example, which had to be overcome. And now it's also the citizenry in a way. So, I mean, so those are some thoughts that came to my mind as I was listening. I mean, through all these.
Thank you, Professor. And
So,
I
yes.
want to, so you have two questions. The first one is about, given the political changes globally and that, as you say, the rise of nationalism and all, kind of more rigid way of looking at groups, and it's less open, it's more like protected. You're wondering what's the state of the right to the city movement. And I want to ask, who would you like to hear from this? Because we don't have a lot of time.
I think that question was more for Adriana and Rodrigo to see. I mean, because, for example, yes, the regime is a problem, but the regime also came to power because of the people, right? So, I mean, so where does the right to the city movement stand in that sense, So this is...
Okay. And so, Rodrigo and Adriana, maybe you can answer that question very short, briefly.
Sure. Rodrigo, do you want to go first?
Can go first.
Sorry?
Please go ahead, Adriana.
Okay. Okay, quite a big question for a short answer, but thank you so much, Ashok, for that. I guess you're saying, what is the relevance then? No, is it relevant at the moment in which we see so much, so many forces working against the right to the city? Is it still relevant, or shouldn't we just withdraw?
No, Adriana, if I may just, I'm not questioning
please.
the relevance. I'm questioning if the challenge has changed now. That's the question.
Okay, super, thank you. I think that thank you for the clarification. I think that the challenges keep on re-articulating, take different faces, take different names, but in the end, over decades, they look very much the same. we always see the articulation of patriarchal, colonial, exploitative capitalism, racist, social and spatial relations reconfiguring themselves. Yeah, and this happens, throughout decades in different geographies, and we see the same story again and again. Again, just taking different circumstances. So I think that perhaps one important thing to say here is that we cannot lose sight of that. We cannot get too depressed about that neither, because that continues, will always continue to operate through waves. But I think that we have to go back to this idea, something that Rodrigo was highlighting. The right to the city is talking about reinventing democracy and making durable democratic processes, and durable democratic processes are never cause-oriented. So I don't think that here we are talking about achieving the right to the city. There will be a point where that's it, we are done. We are talking instead about how to build enduring relationships that have enough muscle, enough social force to, just to give a battle, to face those conditions, while at the same time attending very basic conditions. I think that the key question, again, to elaborate, has to do with the constant individualization of the way we engage with politics as citizens and so on. So there is a very important process there that needs to be conveyed. Education is one line, perhaps not the only one, but I stop here. Thank you. Rodrigo.
No, Adriana completely took my answer and said it. She spoke better than me. But just to add that I also feel that if the challenges, they are changing, our way to approach those challenges are changing too. Our way is changing. We are changing it on the ground and every day. And I see new perspectives for the right to the city movement that are especially designed to face those challenges. So I think it's a dialectic movement. I think we are always aware of what's happening and trying to evolve and being pushed by the context, political context, to do that. So just to add that, I think it's changing, but we are on the pace with the change.
I think what Adriana and Rodrigo is saying, that we're not gonna give up, and we're gonna continue fighting for the rights to the city, whatever it is the challenges are, and that we actually have the learnings and wisdom from the past movements, right, to go forward. Thank you. And the next question was, I guess, for Rifai and Pak Beka about, and Pak Ashok mentioned that, in Indonesia, there's gains, there's regulatory challenges, but also the fact that there's still a lot of organizations, grassroots organizations, CSOs, NGOs that are not included in the effort of the movement for the rights to the city, and that Pak Ashok mentioned that maybe these concepts needs to be introduced sooner, perhaps in schools. Pak Rifai and Pak Beka, what would you like to say to that?
Yeah, I think Pak Rifai can answer first from the civil society side.
Please,
Thank you, Pak Beka. Okay, yes, that's true. There is a growing kind of layers of civil society, especially in the grassroots level. We can see like young movements of like a typical kind of voluntary movement, and then urban movement kind of initiated by young civil society in Indonesia. It's quite a lot, but what is the participation and how to engage them in more kind of policy processes are still lacking. But in terms of right to the city, I think the roles of the state here is to make sure that there is a kind of protections of how it guarantee the space for the participation itself. I'm still very convinced that if we need to grow a civic awareness where the level of civil society to kind of demanding for change is really important. If there is no such kind of movement in the ground, I think the practice and the exercise of right to the city is going to die as well. So I think because in the practice, when we too much kind of dependent upon the state's intervention, it's going to be at some level it's going to be what so-called is, I call it is like instrumentalizations of the participation itself. So for example, in the case of participatory budgeting in Indonesia, when we facilitate civil society involvement in the process of the budgeting, once it's provided the regulation and it's there is a guideline, there is a formal kind of stage of how to participate, but it's once it's been facilitated by the government, it's become more instrumentalized, but there is no such kind of good input from the civil society layer to demand for better kind of proposal for development, so for example. So that's what I'm worried about. So I think I really want to see that as active civil society, so for example, that's why Kota Kita pretty kind of concern of how to push and always encourage a kind of urban movement among our kind of young generation. So it's keep kind of fueling the what is the demand for change in an urban context. That's what I can maybe say about. Maybe Pak Beka.
Yes, thank you. I think, in my opinion, if we look from the human rights perspective, we should divide, quote unquote, the civil society organization in Indonesia into the kind of types. The first one is the CSO that focus on civil and political rights. And the second one is the focus on economy and social cultural rights. The first ones, I think they are focusing how to the central government creating some civic space, so the CSO can demand or in participating in the policy processing. That's the first one. The second one is demanding like a participatory budgeting or the education issues, health issues, or the environment issues. So then, but the problem is sometimes those two kind of types in civil society in Indonesia, they cannot join each other. They're not supporting each other. So sometimes the second one is only try to fight for themselves rather than try to invite more support from the first one type. So I think this is the challenges in civil society organization in Indonesia right now. That's why I think we are to propose more collaborative issue that with more issues, collaborative activities with more issues to be involved. For instance, in the Solo, where the Rifai live in, maybe they should gain also not only for the good public services, but also creating some civic space. For instance, for the freedom of expression, freedom of belief, or the other civil and political rights. So the first one. The second one is also depend on how the local governments creating or responding the demand from the civil society. For instance, how to create the joint activities or joint program, so the participation from the people at the grassroots level can be absorbed, and then so becomes more sustainable policies at the local level. I think that's my answer, adding the comment or response from Rifai. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Buka. And actually, by answering that question, you kind of answer one of the questions that is in Menti as well. There's one question in Bahasa Indonesia. I'll translate it that citizens have different views and maybe have different ideas about the rights of the city and you know how to accommodate those different views. And you mentioned that, you know, find a collaborative issue to help those different groups kind of find common ground, I guess. I want to ask, you mentioned that, you know, one of the ways is creating civic space. And what do you mean by that? Is that, you know, a place where the community can talk directly to the decision makers? And in what way? Is it like a real, is it a meeting like this? Is it through social media? What kind of channels can citizens use?
Yes, Prodita, I think what I mean about the civic space is the space that all the citizens can express their opinion, their ideas, and their perspective to create the better governance in their respective areas. So they can express via social media or via maybe another space that can be more readable, can be more reachable to the people that in the grassroots level. So, and the other problem in Indonesia, we still have internet and electronic transaction law that also in certain degrees that become threatening the civic space in Indonesia. Yeah. The people in Indonesia not freely express their opinion, especially if they criticize the performance of the government, the performance of the president, the mayor, or the governor. The shadowing by police to catch up their ideas, or even they're physically detained in the police office. So that's become some of the challenges in Indonesia right now. So I think that's why I propose that more collaborative activities to overcome those challenges. That's my opinion. Thank you, Prodita.
Thank you, Pak Beka. And I guess I think it has been, you know, such a rich discussion about rights to the city, and I really like what Rodrigo said, that the rights to the city is about, you know, the attempt for democracy, and that actually that is the rights to the city. And I mean, you know, when we talk about rights, it means that we the people need to have the space and capacity to actually participate and express what we want, and have the ability to make that happen. So I think after listening to everyone, we know that it's still a long way to go, right? Especially with the different challenges and the changes that are happening globally. But I think we can also come out with this discussion with optimism, and that that we can always be innovative, that we can always articulate again and again the ideals of the rights to the city, and that the movement we have a lot of social capital to make it happen. So I think I'm going to end the discussion now, because it has been a really engaging more than one and a half hours, and I'm going to return it to Vanessa.
Can I have a question?
Hello?
Can I have the question? So, I mean, there's a lot of questions on the Menti. How we can answer that? I mean, do you think it can be forwarded to the panelists to answer that, or what is the plan? I mean, like, I just want to ask to that, the follow up of that, so many questions on the Menti, which is quite interesting for me as well to see that.
Yes, hi, Pradita and Rifai, thank you for the question. I think if we can choose one question and then we'll wrap it up, and the rest of the questions we'll compile and send it over to each speakers. Is that okay, Pradita and Rifai and everyone? Maybe we can choose one.
Yeah, that's okay. So you will send the question to the panelists, right? Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Vanessa, are we? I'm just concerned about the time. Are we continuing, or would you forward the questions to the speakers, and maybe the speakers can see the questions and answer them?
Yes. Well, maybe
in written.
Yeah. Maybe we can have the most voted question be a closing remark as well from each speaker. Is that okay? I think we can have this question, maybe if each speaker can answer this question, and also as a closing remark to this discussion. So.
Okay, so there's a question here. How do we equally facilitate the marginal groups in the city? Well, sometimes we found that the marginal groups themselves see different values about the city. Maybe, but Rifai, you would like to start?
Okay, this is a challenging question. So, equally facilitated marginal group in the city, while sometimes we found marginalized group themselves see different values, and different value. I think we really have to come back to some of the important notion by Adriana about the importance of difference. I think this value is also respecting different value is really important for us, like in the process of making the city. I think we really need to give the space for this. I think difference value is not the issue, but how to better facilitate and merge this issue and combine this kind of different value to be a kind of powerful force to develop the city. I think that's much more important rather than asking whether we can facilitate kind of process that have different people value from different people. I think that's my point. It's a very important to respect that different value. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Rifai. So respecting different values. But so how do you by respecting the different values, and so there would be some competing values, I guess, with the different values.
That's what right to the city, right? There's competing value everywhere in the city space, right? And let it be. I mean, but we have to understand that this power and the beauty of difference can be very powerful in informing and giving some kind of input for the development of the city. That's what I mean. I mean, like, doesn't necessarily that there is a conflict and it's bad. I mean, like, conflicting, confronting ideas in the city process, in the making of the city, it's a very very important for us. I think we should hear from other speakers as well as they close.
Can I jump in really quickly on
Yes.
that? No, it's because I agree with Rifai that we will always have conflict around the city and how we see the city, how we value the city and our common space. I think that the right to the city doesn't mean that we will not have different points of view or different values. It means that we have to establish a process where these different actors, these different values, these different points of view, they meet each other and they engage in a process that build not to choose one or other value, one or other answer, but a new answer, a new approach that's more than the sum of its parts. So it's a more like a mediation process on how we build a new city from the different values. Of course, there is some limits, some ethical and human rights limits that are at the core of the right to the city, which we cannot leave it behind. So this, and we also have to balance some of the different power and different voice that different players have. We have to equalize a little bit this conversation, but at the end, the idea is to have a conversation that creates a new reality for the cities. I think that's something
Thank you,
the
Rodrigo.
city brings.
Pak Beka?
Yes, the short answer is I think we should or we must using human rights perspective to facilitating all the different values amongst the citizens. Because if we using human rights perspective, that we can use or we can facilitating all the citizens equally, whether you come from the marginalized group or from the other groups that already has advantage from the process in the development. So I think we should use human rights perspective because those kind of perspectives is very basic and must be obeyed by the local government. It's not only at the central level, but also at the local level. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And Adriana, last but not least.
Thank you, Prodita. Just to add to what has been said, perhaps we have to rephrase the question slightly and think about not marginal, but marginalized groups, and think about what is that is marginalizing them. This is very important because it talks to all the political forces that we describe, whether they were in the name, I don't know, described as colonialism, exploitative capitalism, racism, and so on. And we live in cities, we live in a context where we keep on talking and treating and considering certain groups as minorities who are majorities. So this has to do, again, I think that at the core of this is to give centrality to the voice and the experiences, not just equal, I would say centrality, central voice to those whose experiences are typically marginalized and sidelined. And this in very concrete terms means, for instance, if you look at, say, housing policies, how many housing policies and programs do look at the actual conditions that will make it possible for, say, I don't know, single moms, women who are tenants to really access adequate housing. So they're very, very concrete conditions that need to engage with their experience and their voice, and that need to be responded to. We don't need to ventriloquize anyone's experience, but we really need to bring to the fore what is constantly sidelined. And these are the differences that I tried to talk about before.
Thank you, Adriana. So bringing marginalized voices to the fore, right? Respecting the different values, establishing a way for those values to come together and meet and come out with a new approach, something totally outside of our, it's like a creation, I guess. And from Pak Beka, it's start with the guiding principles of human rights principles. Those are really, really great, I guess, strategy for making sure that, you know, marginalized groups can be facilitated and all the different values can be facilitated to meet and have a dialogue and come up with that new approach. Anyway, so thank you so much for all the speakers, Pak Rifai, Rodrigo, Adriana, Pak Beka, Pak Ashokdas for being our discussant, and thank you also to Kota Kita for organizing the Urban Social Forum and this plenary discussion. I'm going to give the mic back to Vanessa.
Great. Thank you very much, Prodita. It has been quite a interesting discussion with a lot of ideas, a lot of issues that we discussed, a lot of dimensions that we sort of covered, which actually maybe not lead to a particular summary, but lead to more questions. And I think that perfectly encapsulates what Adriana meant by, you know, right to the city being an evolving, continuous exercise. So I think if we have more questions, that means we're listening and we're being active. So it's good. So for everyone who has given their questions, we will be sure to give them to speakers, or as Rodrigo has shared, you can reach out to each of the speakers via Twitter. So we have a thread with all of the Twitter handles. So feel free to share it their way as well. And before we close, I would like for us, at least the speakers, maybe for us to have a photo together really quick. I understand it's quite time, so maybe we can have a quick photo. Husna and Indy, are we ready for the photo? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, in 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, once again. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I muted myself. It's quite late here, so apologies. But thank you again for the moderator, for the speakers, for everyone who's joining. We had, I think, at most 200 plus people joining us, so it shows that everyone's interested in this discussion. Just to let you know, because this is an opening plenary, we have 3 discussions next. So if you're curious to see, okay, so we talk about the concept of the right to the city, but what does it mean in practice? What does it mean in the issue? We will unpack those issues in the next 3 sessions. So tomorrow we will have a session on a healthy city, in which we will ask, you know, what is the right to the city in the context of health? Who has the right to be healthy in a city? And what are the ecosystem or the supporting factors of a healthy city? So we'll discuss that tomorrow at the same time. And then we will have also on Thursday, we will have a session on an inclusive city. And on a Friday, we will have a session on a foodie city. You can check the schedules on our website, urbansocialforum.or.id, and also on our social media handles. And with that, I think I will close the session. Thank you very much again. And we hope to see you in the next sessions in the Urban Social Forum. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are.
Thank you, Adriana.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rodrigo.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks to all.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Kasok, Pak Beka.
Bye bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.